Imagine learning to bake in a kitchen where recipes are passed down from generation to generation, often by memory, where a pinch of this or a splash of that might replace standard measuring cups, and where traditions are just as important as ingredients. That's the kind of baking Heidrun Metzler grew up with, and it's exactly the spirit she's bringing to American kitchens with her new cookbook. From apple strudel to black forest cake, Heidrun's recipes carry the flavors of her childhood in Germany, and now she's ready to share her secrets with us. This is Chris Spear, and you're listening to Chefs Without Restaurants, the show where I speak with culinary entrepreneurs and people working in the food and beverage industry outside of a traditional restaurant setting. I have 32 years of working in kitchens, but not restaurants, and currently operate a personal chef service, throwing dinner parties in the Washington, D.C. area. In this episode, we're joined by Heidrun Metzler, who's spent decades preserving her family's baking traditions while adapting them for American home kitchens. Her new book, German Heritage Baking, isn't just a collection of recipes. It's a tribute to the generations of bakers who taught her to make the most out of what's in season and available. Today, she shares stories of baking with her mother and grandmother and what it took to adapt those traditional recipes here in the States. She's even added QR codes to her book so readers can watch her techniques firsthand. Whether you're new to baking or a seasoned pastry chef, Heidrun's insights and love for authentic baking techniques will make you want to roll up your sleeves and begin experimenting. As always, you'll find links in the show notes to Heidrun's book and social media profiles. And there's just 2 more episodes in this season before we hit 250 episodes and go on a little break. And if you're looking to start or grow a personal chef business, be on the lookout for my new podcast, Personal Chef Business Startup Guide, coming in January 2025. You can now follow me on Instagram at Chef Startup for more info. And if you enjoy this episode, please take a moment to subscribe and leave a rating and review. It really helps us grow. Thanks so much for listening, and have a great week. Hey, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you have a new cookbook coming out, which we're going to be talking about. We're talking about baking, and specifically German baking, which I think is going to be an interesting one. I really don't have any background information. Like I have no experience in that. So you're going to teach us a little bit today about German baking?
Yeah, I'd love to.
So I guess, it makes sense to start with your background. I know that you came over to the U.S. when you were young and you picked up a love of baking from your family. So can we start there and just tell me a little bit about your upbringing as it relates to food and baking?
Yeah, so my mother is an incredible cook and baker, and my aunt the same, and my grandma too. My grandma always made things she called it, oh, I have that in my feeling, or I have that in my wrist would be the translation. And my mom said, yeah, she always put stuff together and never looked at the recipe. So she was a hard one to get the recipes from, but, it was a lot of verbal stuff she was telling me. And she actually told me that some of my favorite, we make these sheet cakes that are made out of sweet yeast dough, sort of like a pizza dough, except with sugar. And then you top it with fruit and crumbs, or you just do crumbs, whichever you prefer that day. So one secret she told me that she used to make it in the war, they didn't have any butter. So she used to make it from fat, either from the pig's fat or the geese fat. And that apparently was making it so silky.
We don't do a lot of that anymore. Like that's, you used to see more recipes with lard in them, and that's really fallen out of favor. And then you have some of the recipes like from my grandparents' generation with like the Depression, where they moved to like margarine or like a Crisco type thing. And some of those recipes I see still prevail. I have trouble with that. I had a recipe a couple of weeks ago I was trying to make, and it had margarine in it. And I'm like, I can't. I'm going to do butter in this recipe.
Yeah. Exactly. I always, there was a time where they said butter is bad for you, eat margarine. I never listened to it. It's like, I can't eat it. And then it turned out it was actually okay.
Yeah, I know. It goes back and forth every couple of years. Do you find that we our generations have less of that intuitive cooking? Because this is something I hear with everyone I talk to is, everyone's grandmother cooked by taste and sight and feel. And then it almost like jumped and all of a sudden everyone needed like a recipe and a cookbook to follow, to be able to do something. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I feel like that too. And especially in baking, I feel like from generation of generation, it's getting more and more lost. And one of the reasons I wrote this book is because I didn't want the recipes to get lost and the ability to put things together. And I encourage creativity in my book, and I want people to experiment. And if you just experiment, don't change out a lot at once, experiment a little by little, and then see how it tastes. And you can't really go wrong that way if you keep the base recipe the same and just change a little bit of something, whatever idea you might have. Like I often think, oh, this cake might be good with a different fruit, or yeah, I love baking with liqueurs.
Do you have a favorite liqueur to use?
Yeah, Grand Marnier is probably my favorite.
You have expensive taste.
Yeah, that's what my husband tells me. No, I also use amaretto, almond liqueur, chocolate liqueur, orange liqueur. Of course, for the Black Forest cake, you have to use the cherry brandy. And I found an excellent brandy in Oregon. There's a distillery that makes it just like the German one. It's very hard to find, things that taste just like in Germany or here in the US. But yeah, one of the reasons I wanted to make this book is my son, when he got his house and his kitchen, he was about 30. He said, Mom, you have to finish this book because I can't find anything that tastes like what you bake. I want to bake, and so my idea was I need to bring this to the States. And I had a lot of questions from other friends saying, how do you do this? How do you put a crust together? And I was going, you don't know how to, I mean, it's like a basic thing. Like if you read a German baking book, it won't even tell you how to put the crust together. It just will say, make the crust.
Well, I don't know anyone who does baking anymore, like with, you can buy your pie crust in the freezer, you can buy a cake mix in the store. I think it is really rare. I mean, people aren't even cooking, let's be honest, like a dinner. I see people all the time, pulling like a frozen cod out of the freezer and having that for dinner. And I've done that, but I don't think people are making on a regular basis, like a pie or a cake or anything like that. And they just don't have the skill. And if they do, when's the next time they do that? Okay, I finally broke out the cookbook. I made this pie. Great. It might be 6 months before they ever make a pie again.
Yeah, well, that's okay. As long as you make it on your, I think there's just something about making your own pie or your own cake. And it's like hands on. You did it. You made it. You're eating it. It tastes great. And I think you'll be inclined to do it again.
Were these all recipes that you had always made, or did you also feel like you needed to bring in some more to make a bigger book?
Well, it's some of both. And I had a bunch of recipes from my aunt and from my mother that I brought over. And then every time I'd go visit, I'd pick their brains. What are you doing? What new recipe are you doing? And, how do you do this? Or I just always had questions. And they always would go, well, which cake do you want me to bake for you? And it was great, But yeah, going back to your question, so I took these recipes, and there were some that I completely loved the way they are, and some that I changed some things because I wanted them to be a little bit more light or a little bit more moist. And so I might take away a little bit of flour or add a little bit of milk, or it doesn't always, I have to test it a couple of times to get the correct consistency. I get a little obsessional when I want to try something out and I want to get it just the way I want to get it. And so some of the recipes I did change a little bit. And sometimes as I'm making it, ideas come to my mind. I love marzipan. There isn't any, I don't know if I should be saying that, but maybe I should rephrase it and say there's better marzipan in Germany.
No, that's fine. Like this is all about honesty on this podcast. No, we have very little. I mean, if I wanted it, I'd go to the store and there's probably one brand, right, in the grocery store, and I don't even know the quality of it. It might be like the commercial grade, like Roland brand or something like that. Like I don't know, but I don't think I really have a lot of availability. I don't think most people have a lot of variety when it comes to something like that.
Yeah, there are a couple of online stores you can get it at German stores, and it's fairly easy to be sent to you. Here in the States, if I go to grocery store, I always get the almond paste because the almond paste has less sugar and it tastes better to me. And I can add a little powdered sugar if I need to. And then, essentially that's marzipan. So you can also make it yourself. You can take, if you have a nut grinder, it'd be better, but I do it with the handheld coffee mill with a star blade in it. And you just have to not fill it up very much, maybe less than half. And you keep pulsing and shaking and eventually it becomes this paste.
Yep.
And you take that out and you repeat till you get the amount you want. And then you add, in Germany, sometimes we add rose water, but very, very little. And almond extract you can add and powdered sugar. And then there you have your marzipan. But yeah, so one of the cakes that came to my mind one day, I saw some technique on working the marzipan with the egg yolks and putting it together. And then I thought, I could make an almond cake out of this and put raspberries in it. And so the raspberry almond tart is created like that. It came out like that. And then I put some, there are slivered almonds and sliced almonds you can get, but you want to get the sliced almonds for that one. And they're very hard to do at home, so I usually buy them. And then I roasted them a little bit in the pan, put them on top, dusted with powdered sugar, and it's very good. Recently, we had our little town is called Honokaa, and we are on the Big Island, and we have a macadamia nut farm that annually does their little get-togethers with music, and there's a pie contest, cake contest. So I thought, well, I'll make one, and you get macadamia nuts, to make it. And I took that recipe and half the almonds with half ground macadamia nuts and half almonds. And then I caramelized some whole macadamia nuts and put them on top. And anyway, it was really good.
Well, that makes sense because you're using something that's local to you. You're taking a somewhat traditional recipe, but I mean, I think of Hawaii, I think of macadamia nuts. So that makes sense.
Yeah. And that's how I kind of think. I think I usually take my own recipes to make something new. Even if I get an idea from somewhere else, I always go back to my bases because I know they work and I know how to do it. And then it's easy to change. But there was one cake, it was called Bailey's Irish Cream Pound Cake that kept coming up on Pinterest, the picture. And I thought, oh, that's a good idea, Bailey's, and then I kept thinking, but a pound cake? And so I decided it should be chocolate. So I went back to my mousse cake and then derived from the mousse cake and the Baileys and some other things. Of course, whipped cream goes in there. I made the Irish chocolate cake. I'm not supposed to say the brand, in my book. So I think everybody knows it's the alcohol.
Yeah, most definitely. Is there any issue with finding ingredients in the States, and maybe even specifically where you are in Hawaii? Like when you look at traditional German recipes, like have you had to translate things just because you can't find some products? Like you were mentioning good marzipan, but what's been your experience overall with making these recipes?
Well, I wish I had finer flour here. I mean, flour is different in Germany, but I ended up working with one brand because that's the brand I have available here all the time. And I adjusted it. Every recipe is adjusted to that flour. In Germany, we have a system where the flour gets graded by how much protein is in there and how much minerals. And the way they do it is they burn 100 grams at 900 degrees, and the ash that's left gets measured. And so you end up with a number like 400, 405, that's the weight that was left. So every miller will have to adhere to those particular rules. And if you buy 405, it's for the cakes. If you buy 550, you can do yeastos with it. If you buy 1080 or 1050, then you get more and more of the shell of the grain in there, which gets more into the whole wheat, and like rye flours are usually that high. And then if the entire grain is milled with nothing taken out, then we just call it whole grain. And everybody knows that's the whole entire grain. So it's very difficult here in the States because they don't have any of these guidelines. And so I have to look at all the labels, and I tried out different flours. And one flour will take, even though they are all supposed to be for cake making, they will absorb the water in a different way. So if you made a pound cake, for example, with one flour, it comes out just right. The next time you use another flour from another brand, you should probably add a little more water because that flour absorbs more liquid. And whatever the liquid is, it can be the eggs, the milk, or, whatever. But that part, I was concerned about just writing in unbleached flour because I thought, well, whatever brand, it's not going to turn out if they buy the wrong brand. So I was challenged with this brand mentioning in the book, and I ended up consulting with a trademark lawyer to make sure I write it in a way that it is acceptable to do that. And when necessary, I did mention the brands in a way that falls under the fair use of trademarks. So, but it was the only way I could think of to give to give success for my recipes. So the other thing that's been hard is the apples. Most of the time, it's just eating apples that are sold here. And because I guess people are not as much into baking as in Germany, you don't have that variety. Because in Germany, you go to the store and you have the baking apples and the eating apples, and the Renettes and the Cox oranges and the Boskop and Braeburn is the only brand here that I can use. And Braeburn is a pretty tough apple, so oftentimes you have to saute it a little bit before you use it, just 5 to 10 minutes maybe. Or if you like the al dente, it's fine. I make it sometimes without doing that, and because I like the crunchiness, it depends on how you like it.
We have an orchard about 15 minutes from us, and they have all kinds of varietals that I've never seen in my life, and it's great. And they have all the signs on them that say, great for eating, great for baking, great for cider making, and you go. But I mean, they're these, funky, sometimes gnarly, not picturesque, photogenic apples.
Yeah.
But they're delicious. And I always try and pick up a bunch of different ones to see what I can do with them.
Where do you live in? What area?
I'm in Maryland, so we have a lot here on the East Coast there. And this place actually makes, one of the things we go for is cider. So in the season, they make alcoholic cider, and they're not sweet ciders. I mean, they have a little residual sugar, but they're not like, the sweet ones that we have in so many places. And then they have the non-alcohol all year round that's, pasteurized for kids and stuff. But yeah, we'll go, every couple of weekends in the fall and get apples and cider.
Yeah, that's when I investigated about the apples, the Northeast has different orchards that grow the European varieties, and there is a couple in California. And I was actually looking into if they get imported here because they have to be approved, agriculturally approved, but no one imports them. So I mention all of that, and if you're lucky to live in such an area, you can get those, and I'll be jealous.
What is your favorite apple recipe to make?
Well, I like the covered apple cake. That's our German apple pie, basically, and it's the one I grew up with that always was made by my aunt and my mother, and there was always this discussion about whose is better, because my aunt was baking it in her gas oven and my mom in her electric oven, and the crust turns out different, but they're both equally good. And it was funny every time we got together. It was this thing about which oven bakes it better.
It's the same as even in an oven. And I know you talk about this in your book, like the placement of the oven racks. It's amazing how much just where your racks go in the oven, how much that impacts, whatever you're making in there.
Yeah, because, the top can get too brown or the bottom can get too brown, and you got to figure out sometimes, even with me telling you, your oven might be different enough where you have to figure it out. If it comes out and it's just too brown on the top, then lower it a little bit. I often place a cookie sheet on the very lowest rung just to keep it from getting too brown at the bottom. The other thing I do is I take aluminum foil and make it about an inch or two bigger than the cake pan is, and then about, depends on which cake you're baking, how long you're baking it, but usually when the cake bakes longer than an hour, you're probably going to have to put a little bit on, like maybe 15, 20 minutes before it's ready. You have to slide it on top, just so it doesn't get too brown. The German ovens bake differently. We have over and under heat, so it always bakes with both heats, so it's more even. It's more like a even heat, like a convection oven, but if you use convection, you get it in cakes, they kind of turn dry. So I experiment with a lot of where to place it and how to do, which cake needs a pan underneath, what needs to be covered, and it's all in the book. Yeah, my mom always said, you have to try out your oven. Every oven is different. And I recently, after I got done with all the testing and everything, I bought a new oven. It's a German oven that throws out mist while your bread is baking.
That's fancy.
Yeah, and I really wanted it because I know the crust turns out different. And so I called her up and I said, hey, I got a new oven. I got a German oven. So where do you bake such and such and what rung? And she's like, oh, you just have to try it out. Every oven is different.
Fancy oven and that no help there.
Yeah, but because she bakes her cheesecake on the very bottom. And if I did that in my oven, I end up with a very dark crust. I mean, it'd just be too dark.
Do you bake your cheesecake in a water bath?
I don't, but I heard of people doing that.
I think that's most of the recipes I see, to be honest, is baking cheesecake in a water bath. Unless you're doing, now everyone's doing the Basque kind of burnt cheesecake, which is a dry heat and a higher one. Do you know what I'm talking about? The dark cheesecake?
No.
No? Oh, it's like been a trend for like the past 5 years or so. It almost looks burnt, like caramelized, but it's
I
usually
did see that.
like
Yeah,
the
I
thick
did see a
cheesecake,
picture.
and usually they do put they put like parchment paper, so they like line a cake pan with parchment and put it in and blast it in the bottom. It almost, I actually made one and it was delicious, but my mother-in-law said to me, "This was delicious. It's just such a shame that you burned." And I was like, no, like really, it's supposed to be like that. And I don't think she believed me, but I was like, no, this is how you're supposed to make it.
I did see that picture, and I have to admit, I thought the same thing. I thought, well, and you can do that with my cheesecake. If you don't cover it, it will get burnt. But I don't. I preferred. I mean, I wouldn't think the skin would taste good.
Well, it's supposedly a Spanish, I guess, like a Basque thing. And I don't know who
Oh,
popularized it in the past few years, but it's something that I'm seeing on menus all the time now. And I actually
okay.
really I don't know who popularized that, but I feel like it came out of nowhere and all of a sudden you see it everywhere now. So yeah, if you saw a picture of one I did, that was intentional. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I think one of the things really that's interesting is your book uses QR codes that go to videos, which is something I've seen maybe in like 3 or 4 books. Where did you like what made you want to do that with your cookbook?
Well, actually, it was a suggestion my son had, and he wanted me to do QR codes for shopping lists, and I just you can only get so much on a page, and so I thought of, it'd be great for people to see me do it hands on. I learn better when I see something, and I like video making. I make a lot of videos. And so, it takes a time, but my goal is to have a video for at least for every type. So my book is organized by dough types. And so I organized my Vimeo video by dough types, showcases, it's called there. So I have a showcase for each chapter. So when you look in there, you can find all the instructions for everything. So I'm hoping to get a video up for each item that I bake. And I think so far we have at least one item in each one of them that describes how to make that particular dough in that chapter.
Now, did you record these all just for the book, or did you already have some of these done?
No, I recorded them for the book.
It's a lot of work on top of doing the book, right? I mean, I know just trying to do like the short form videos, because now it's like, oh, make videos, cooking videos, post them on social media. And it's like, this was a lot. It took like 5 hours to make this 20-second video. So yeah, kudos to you for going the extra mile.
Yeah, and I can't really teach anything in 20 seconds. And so I usually go for 30 seconds, and they give you the analytics, and it looks like, it dives. Like they don't watch the whole 30 seconds.
But the flip side is I did a video the other day and I got it down to 30 seconds because I thought that's what I want. And then it was flagged for not quality content, which, what does that even mean? Have you been on the internet? It's like almost exclusively not quality content. I watched someone videotape his cat eat a plastic bag yesterday. Yeah. Like that's quality content, but that's the world we're living in. Again, do the video or get left behind.
Actually, I just started a YouTube channel because, like you said, a lot of I used to not like the thumbs down. I had a lot of my horse videos on there, and I'd get thumbs down on these elaborate. I have trick horses, so we put costumes on and do tricks, and people go thumbs down, and I'm like, I'm tired of this. Like, you have a horse that sits on a hay bale.
Just wait till the food, because the food people are brutal. I spent the past 2 days arguing with random strangers, which probably wasn't a good use of my time. But, people just, it's the nature of the internet and social media and videos and stuff. But, you have to just keep putting those videos out on YouTube.
Yeah. And then Vimeo, of course, I have all the showcases. So you can just Google me and find it.
So do you have some beginner recipe? Like if someone's, let's say, new to baking, they didn't grow up baking with their family, this sounds like an interesting book and they pick it up, where do you suggest they start? Are there some really good starter recipes that'll help people build their confidence and say, oh, wow, this wasn't as hard as I thought?
Yeah, I mean, you can already tell how involving something is when you read the recipe. But recently, I have a webpage, heidrunmetzler.com, and you can also find the newsletter that I've sent out in the past under resources. And the last one I sent out had a coconut macaroon recipe on it, which I thought was probably one of the easiest recipes you can make. And so you could start there. Cookies are always fun. So I had to split up my book into two books, volume 1 and 2, because it got too large for mailing and printing and the price and everything.
So you'll have another book coming then?
Yeah.
That's exciting.
Yeah, the second book will have all the pound cakes, quick breads, like you call them. But yeah, on book 1, I would say it also depends on if you're kind of creative and you like creating with your hands, then I think you're good with more complicated things like the Linzer tort. You just have to have a grinder or buy the problem that I found is, so when I first started baking here, they had almond meal and almond flour. And now it's really hard to find the almond meal because the almond meal is a little bit coarser, but the almond flour is just too fine. And it makes the cake more dense and then it doesn't work. So I actually grind my own almond meal. I have a KitchenAid that has an attachment and it works just fine. So if you're interested in that, you could use ground almonds and ground hazelnuts and then butter. And it's basically put together like a short crust. And then you roll it out, spread your raspberry jam or the red currant jam. So, and then you just make a lattice with it, and put a lattice on top.
I like how you just said, just make a lattice. Like that's something that seems daunting to me, just to make a lattice. I think I need to work on my skills because, I don't know, that seems a little like next level from where I'm at. And I'm sure it is for some people, but practice, right? You just got to practice it.
Well, it's, you roll it out like you would your crust, but then you take this, you can buy these little wheels and you just go and do strips. And then you start at one end with a shorter strip and you put them across. And then you take the other side of what you just cut and you start with the short end on the other side. So you get this diagonal thing going. And that's the easiest lattice you can do.
So is there anything that you feel we haven't talked about today that you want to let your listeners know about either your book or just German baking in general before we get out of here today?
Yeah, I think for now, until the book comes out, if bakers want to bake, I think consider a couple of things. One is when you measure your flour, shake off, like dip the cup in the flour bag and then shake off the top so it's in between 3/4 to full, because too much flour in the batter is really hard to take care of. But if you have a little bit less and you save some for the end, then you can always add easier. If you end up with having to put more liquid in, then you get this lumpy mess and you might overmix your cake. The other thing which has happened to me is take 2 bowls when you separate your egg yolks and your egg whites, and make sure the egg yolks go in the bowl first before you put them in your kitchen mixer bowl or somewhere. I have cracked eggs directly in my bowl. The last one was rotten. I could throw out everything.
I've also had problems where if you're separating them too, like sometimes you need just a white or just a yolk. And if you're separating, I've sometimes tried separating over the bowl and then like the yolk breaks and now I've got egg yolk and something that's just supposed to have egg white in it. That's no good.
Exactly. Yeah. And then experiment with putting an extra pan underneath if you bake your cake for a long time, over an hour so your crust doesn't get brown. What else? Your egg and your butter needs to be at room temperature most of the time, unless you do one of those crusts, the short crust. You do want the cold butter and the cold egg. But if you do anything else, like a pound cake or anything, you want it room temperature. When you get that kind of gristly looking butter when you mix it, it's because your butter wasn't, all the temperatures have to be the same and you want it room temperature.
I usually will bring my butter up to room temperature, but I think the thing I don't do enough of is the eggs, even though like every recipe says room temperature eggs.
Yeah.
I'm always like, how bad is it? Just pull the eggs out of the fridge and go. So I think that's something I probably need to focus more on since it's in literally every baking recipe I ever see.
Yeah. Also, if you forget the eggs, you can put them in warm water for about 5 minutes. And
I've learned that trick recently. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And, the other thing, when you do a complicated cake, like, for example, the Black Forest cake, you can make the cake part the day before. And then the next day you can fill it. You can even cook the cherry filling up the day before, put it in the fridge. And then all you have to do is put it together the next day, which is, that's the way I do it, because it's a couple of hours if you do it all in one day.
That's more my style. I rarely make a cake in one day, in one sitting. Yes.
But the cheesecake is actually pretty fast. It's amazing how fast it is.
Well, everyone loves cheesecake, so that might move to the top of my list of things to try out of the book there. Well, thanks for coming on the show. It's been great talking to you today.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for inviting me. It was fun talking with you.
And I put everything in the show notes so people will be able to find your book and find you on social media and watch your videos, whether it be cooking videos or baking videos or horse videos. We're going to give you some thumbs up on some horse videos.
Yeah, they actually, did away with the thumbs down now in YouTube after a lot of complaining from people. So that was good.
I didn't realize that. Oh,
yeah.
So thumbs up or nothing.
Yeah.
All right.
Much better.
You're still here? The podcast's over. If you are indeed still here, thanks for taking the time to listen to the show. I'd love to direct you to one place, and that's chefswithoutrestaurants.org. From there, you'll be able to join our email newsletter, get connected in our free Facebook group, and join our personal chef, catering, and food truck database so I can help get you more job leads. And you'll also find a link to our sponsor page where you'll find products and services I love. You pay nothing additional to use these links, but I may get a small commission, which helps keep the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast and organization running. You might even get a discount for using some of these links. As always, you can reach out to me on Instagram at Chefs Without Restaurants or send me an email at chefswithoutrestaurants@gmail.com. Thanks so much.